Perhaps you heard, the recording of the panel discussion on day one was lost. The official story blamed a faulty hard drive, but conspiracy theories arose from corners of the internet on the real cause of the failure. Those who attended the Midwestuary panel realized its importance, and the loss of the recording would prove significant. Despite further challenges, Chad the Girl Dad embarked on a search. Many brave attendees came forward to provide partial recordings, made on personal devices. These were gathered with the aim to stitch together the discussion in its entirety, but hope for a complete recovery was low. Then Jack J., a hero from Delaware, brought forth a full audio recording of the historic panel made from a recording device he held in the audience. The audio file was procured, and the utmost care was taken to preserve it for future generations. What you are about to hear is the recording of the Day 1 Midwestuary 2025 panel discussion with Elizabeth Oldfield, Rod Dreher, Paul Vanderklay, Jonathan Pageau, and John Vervaeke. The host is Cale Zelden.
All right, so panel, this is purely reactionary. So you don't have to come up with anything except reacting to the question. All right, my first favorite question, I don't have an author, these have been submitted to me anonymously, so if you know, you know. Okay, we have heard several speakers refer to the meaning crisis. Could someone briefly explain what that is and how it developed? Before John takes this, there's like 50 hours of it. So maybe that's what they're asking. Is like, can we do a quickie?
I just asked, and apparently they're sold out of my book, so I can't tell you just go buy the book.
Sold out.
So we need to be, I'm not going to repeat the arguments I made. We need to be really good. We need to be connected. When people are talking about meaning in life, that's what they're talking about. The metaphor they often use is, I want to be connected to something larger to myself. But that's a metaphor, because if you chain them to an ocean liner, they don't feel fulfilled. Right? So what does it mean? And then they struggle. But I want you to think about some of the words that are woven into wisdom traditions, like awakening or enlightenment. When you're in a dream, you're in a little world and it seems real to you, yes? And then we wake up, awakened, that's what Buddha means, the awakened one. And you awaken to a larger world that has the capacity to show you how you were deceived in the smaller world. Does that make sense? So when people say they want to be connected to something larger than themselves, they're really saying, I want to be connected to something that's more real, that will liberate me from self-deception, self-destructive behavior. And so that's why I was sort of railing against the idea of meaning is a totally personal matter. It's something I have my own meaning. It's like meaning doesn't work that way. It has to be shareable, it has to be correctable, because it's ultimately about connecting you more deeply to what is real. Now that means that making your life more meaningful is inseparably bound up with cultivating wisdom, where wisdom doesn't mean saying vaguely obscure things in French cafes or on mountaintops. Wisdom means your ability to see through self-deception and connect to what's real, within and without, in a way that enhances your agency, your selfhood, and your personhood, which means it enhances the community's ability to do that, because personhood and community are inseparable. Okay, so the short explanation for the meaning crisis is, in order to cultivate wisdom, knowledge is about what you know, wisdom is about how you know. In order to cultivate wisdom, you have to do a lot of practices, and you have to have a lot of good role models, and you have to have a tradition that gives you a sense of the depth and the significance of the practices. The place that used to do all of that was religion. And the West has done something that we've never done before in the history of the world, we've tried to, right, basically secularize for good reasons. And what that meant is we separated the cultivation of wisdom from the acquisition of knowledge, which also has nothing to do with how meaningful you find your life. That means you're starving for connection, you're starving for, and I know you won't believe this, but you're starving for wisdom. No, I'm not. How many of you want to be less foolish? You're starving for wisdom, okay?
If I were less foolish, it would ruin my brand. If I were less foolish, it would ruin my brand.
So, for a bunch of historical reasons, we separated all those things, and you can see that in how the church about life, and the university, which was about knowledge, and the monastery, which was about wisdom, and they were all like this, and then they got separated and isolated. Answer me. Hold up your phone, you're all cyborgs, I think. Okay, where do you go for knowledge? Maybe this is science, I don't know. Where do you go for wisdom? You got a YouTube for wisdom, I don't know. Yeah. So the point I'm making is, you can't cultivate wisdom without practice, community, tradition, and you can't cultivate meaning or the enhancement of meaning without cultivating wisdom. And our culture has abandoned that project. That's the meaning crisis. And sorry, that's probably not very convincing, but I'm trying to collapse 50 hours of argument, way more than 50, because I've been talking about this since 2019. So all the hours of video, so that's my best attempt.
So, for the rest of the panel, just to stick on this point for a minute, thank you, John, that was a good. I think each of you on the panel has tilled in this soil of the meaning crisis. And this is sort of when you hear the phrase, you kind of get the sense, it resonates with you right away. So I was wondering if anybody, Paul, you've been kind of walking all of us through in a way of sort of charting potential pathways in and around and through the meaning crisis. So I wonder if you wanted to sort of chime in a little bit, just not to put this all on John, in other words.
Well, when John, I was, obviously listening to this, and if I had been in my office listening to John, when he talked about religion, I think that's religion and secularity, that's where I sort of would have paused and said something. Because we look at the legacy religions that we call them when you think of Christianity and its various elements, lots of other religious type things have developed within secularity. No, I know you don't. I'm not arguing with you here. And those have impacted the religions as well. And so, while for many people, if their legacy religion continued to function in a very deep, community-rich, wisdom-delivering way, you won't find as much meaning crisis in that person. But other religions that have been in some ways flattened, undermined, then you'll get more. And so it's a very sophisticated marbling within our culture. And many people are seeking wisdom in other kinds of things and finding some things. And so, and that's sort of where Jonathan's work fits into John's. Because when I look at what Jonathan does, Jonathan sort of takes religion and maps it out, colors it out, helps spread it around. But so much of this stuff is below the waterline. And so now we're just seeing a lot of dislocation of churches. We're calling it deconstruction, people dropping out. So it's kind of a mess. But yeah, so that's just a thought.
Okay, well, this follows, so it's okay.
Hey, Gil, can I just jump in real quick?
Please, yeah.
I remember back when I was in college and finding my way to Christianity, I encountered Kierkegaard. And his if anybody knows anything about Kierkegaard, it's probably his saying, truth is subjectivity. Now, you might think, I certainly did think he was saying that there's no such thing as objective truth. That's not what he's saying at all. He was a Christian. He believed there was objective truth. His point was about the way we know things. He said that the kind of truths for which one can live and die are truths that must be appropriated inwardly with passion. In other words, the things, to speak in a vulgar way, things that you know with your heart. Nobody lives and dies for scientific theorems or 2 + 2 = 4, but you do live and die for claims like, Jesus Christ was the Son of God, or, Muhammad was the prophet of God, etc. And it was a real challenge to me. It helped me finally open my mind in some ways to Christianity, because I had this idea that I just need to find the right argument that would make it make sense, logical sense, boom, I'd be in. But it's not. Your will is much more bound up in it. So people who say that they're searching for wisdom, they have to be humble enough to open themselves up to the possibility of change if they're going to find it. And it's not an easy thing to find wisdom, of course, but if you're looking for the right argument, find the right book that'll give you the right argument, it'll all make sense. It just doesn't happen that way.
So this follows, does it say Trey? Trey. A philosopher once said, quote, "Is nihilism true, or do you just not have any friends?" Unquote. So, I pose the same question. Quote, "Is the meaning crisis real, or do people just not have any friends?" End quote. And that is for the panel.
You need wisdom to maintain a life-giving friendship.
But I think the meaning crisis is appearing in all these different spheres at the same time. And so on the one hand, it is happening to our societies where we don't know why we're together. We don't know what identities are. We have an unbalanced relationship to our heritages, to our nations, to our families. So it's happening, sorry, I won't use the word. It's happening at every level simultaneously. So it's not just a fractured bit. So it's not just a religious crisis. It's something that in some ways, as the connection, the kind of medieval synthesis, we could call it, where the world had a religious vision that was connected to the philosophy of the world, and then the society was a reflecting of all of that. So there was this kind of synthetic societal structure. As that broke apart for all kinds of reasons, some that are philosophical, some that are scientific, one of the things that happened is that the scientific discoveries at the surface looked like they contradicted the religious revelation. And so you have this breakdown where things are kind of pulling apart from each other, and you can't frame the world with the ancient way of thinking anymore, and this new way of thinking doesn't offer you a connection to the deeper meanings. And so it's all of these things that are kind of happening simultaneously. And so, the meaning crisis is absolutely real, whether you call it that or not, however you want to call it. It's happening at every level. And it's true that it does lead to people struggling to have friends, because what are we doing together? Why are we together? What's the thing that unites us? We don't even know how to think about these questions anymore. We don't know how to formulate them. And so it's happening simultaneously. But at the same time, we kind of reached, I would say, during COVID and maybe a little bit before, we kind of reached, seems to me, like peak meaning crisis, where things became so fragmented and so crazy that a lot of people are waking up from the meaning crisis, to use John's terms, and are noticing that, no, actually we need to come back and reintegrate things together. And so it's a wild time. It's like a time of all kinds of possibilities. It's a time where people who usually don't talk to each other end up talking to each other, where things that usually don't meet together are starting to meet again. So there's this moment, it's like a laboratory. There's things that are boiling and things that are crashing together. And so it's exciting. It's dangerous because some people are worshiping AI and there's UFOs and there's psychedelics and there's Christianity returning and people becoming Orthodox and becoming Catholic so it's all of this is going on. And so it's actually I think it's one of the most exciting times that we could live in. It's going to be hard, but it's what can come out of it can be very beautiful. And I think all of you who are here have a little glimpse of that beauty, even in this conference.
So, first of all, that was great. Another way of thinking about the meaning crisis, and I've talked to Kieran McCameron about this, is his name for it is the trust apocalypse. So, really well done research survey. Trust in everything is going down. It's not just trust in religion, it's trust in every single institution. It's trust in other people. The number of close, trustworthy friends people have is reliably declining by decades. So saying, well, you just don't have any friends, it's like, well, but why is it getting increasingly difficult? Well, because the thing you need for friendship is trust. And I was trying to make the argument in my talk that there's deep connections between trust and a recognition of shared, mutually correctable meaning. And so trying to say, well, you just need to have more friends is to, okay, so I need to trust people. Then what do I need? Well, I need more shared, correctable meaning. And what does that look like in our society? And the answer is we don't know, because since Kant, especially, we've been glorifying autonomy. We are autonomous. I'm authentic. I'm true to my true self. It's autonomous. And the problem is meaning is not autonomous. It can't be. It doesn't work that way. And so I want to push back on the question. I think there's cruelty in the question, which people want friends. And the meaning crisis is one of the things that's actually thwarting them at having more friends. And if you're fortunate to have more friends, don't lord it over the situation. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit pissed at this. Because it's really, really hard. I have to deal on a regular basis with people who are getting crushed by loneliness. I'm watching my own son struggle. My son Jason, who's one of the best people I know in my life, struggle to form friendships and he's a good man. Be a little bit more, whoever said that, be a little bit more aware of why friendship is so hard today.
I wonder. In your talk, Elizabeth, you mentioned, you sort of provocatively said there's no such thing as an individual, and I wonder if that might be a way to get at what John...
Yeah, I think maybe my simple response to the question is the meaning crisis is real because it's so hard to have friends, right? That if, I remember hearing John say meaning is a relational concept and that unlocking the whole thing for me. That when we have this false anthropology of isolated, self-actualizing, self-optimizing, rational acting individuals in the world, we deracinate ourselves from the sources of wisdom, which I believe is God primarily, and then each other, And so this, the individualizing tendencies of our culture is what's making it so hard to know who we are, to know where we've come from, to know where we're going, to locate ourselves in a story. So I think there's a necessary connection between the two.
Well, and we also have fewer shared sources, shared experiences. I can remember in the 1970s when I was in elementary school, we had only 3 television networks in the US, and everybody, all the kids, watched the same stupid sitcoms. So the talk the next day at school was, did you see Happy Days last night? Did you see Welcome Back, Kotter? And these were, whatever else they were shared experiences that allowed us to form communities. And I can remember at that same time, I grew up out in rural Louisiana in the country. Every weekend, all of the adults, our parents, would come together at somebody's house for a barbecue, a crawfish boil, fish fries, something like that. The kids would play, would stay till very late then, and that was every weekend. You only did it because that's what you did. People didn't stop and think, do I have a better option? You just did it. When I became an adult and all of us kids grew up, moved off to work or college or jobs, whatever, I would go home to visit my parents in the 90s, and they weren't doing this anymore. None of the parents were. They all had satellite dishes, and they would sit at home, and they weren't really enjoying it, but it was enough of a sort of a vaccine against community. Because why get out of a chair and go somewhere and do something when there's just enough going on television to keep you anesthetized? And you got out of the habit of practicing community. And now, I mean, God only knows what happens with the internet. I know myself that there are times when somebody is having a party tonight, well, I can watch what's on YouTube, and before you know it, the evening's gone, and I've wasted it. But I guess when we start thinking about our social lives for ourselves as individuals who have time to kill, and the idea of living becomes avoiding boredom, that's when community starts to die. And I think when you think that you have a choice, I could go out tonight, I could go to the barbecue, or I could stay home. Yeah, we all have that choice. We always did. But again, when it was just expected that we're part of this community, of course you're going to go to the fish fry, even if you don't really feel like it, because that's what we do. Once these things became things you thought about, then they began to die, I think, because you began to think about what's good for me tonight? What would make me less bored? And it's always less risky to sit at home watching the internet, doing something on the internet, than it is to go mix it up with people.
Sarah Steiner Brano, who I quoted earlier, calls this social atrophy. There's a really interesting research around the actual shrinking of the brain when we spend more time alone, and I think beginning to reframe this stuff as a muscle. You know, when we're thinking about taking care of ourselves, we're trying to get good food, trying to move our bodies, we need to see people regularly, like putting it on the list of things that we need to maintain our humanness and our bodily health, because social atrophy is a vicious cycle. The less time you spend with people, the more difficult it is to spend time with people, the more easy it is to feel a bit paranoid and a bit worried that you've said the wrong thing. You know, the instances of social anxiety go up, and then it's really hard to get out of that. And I think that, you know, the muscles of the people at the crawfish boil for tolerating how annoying other people are were really strong. But if you don't have the scaffolding for it and you don't see it as something that, if you don't maintain it, you will lose it, then we get into these kind of situations. So I'm finding that kind of framing quite helpful.
Well, and I think people are just generally less tolerant of others. Like a few years ago when I was living in Baton Rouge, I was having beers with some of my buddies, all of us Christians. They were all Catholics. I'm Orthodox, professional, like early middle-aged guys. And we all realized that all of us had made a deliberate decision not to go to dinner parties unless we knew everybody there was conservative. Now, it was not because we didn't want to hang out with people who didn't think like us. It was because all of us had had the very unpleasant experience of being at a social gathering where there was one or more crusading liberals who, upon finding out that we were conservative, didn't share all their views, made a point of making a scene, you know, and attacking us. And that's just something that never happened when I was growing up. You know, you had liberals and conservatives, but people had a sense that politics is not, it's not an ultimate thing. You know, it's secondary. But now, all it takes is one or two people who are willing to blow up a social situation to make a political point to scare people off, you know? And none of us were happy to be that. We liked talking to different people. But a couple of the guys were in public office, and they could have a straight comment that somebody at a social scene would have put on Twitter could have taken them down, and it just wasn't worth the risk. And I think that has to be something new, the way people have become so brittle and so easily angered and have found a way to destroy other people through social media. That has been a real turnoff to making friends. There's been some...
recent research, Pew Research,
So for a very long time, people's religious orientation was predictive of their political orientation. It's predictive. It doesn't mean it's, but chances are, if you were religious this way, you would orient that way. So, and it's now flipped. Political orientation is determining religious orientation in the United States, which is really kind of crazy.
There's also a lot of research on people who, even though churches can sometimes skew along political lines, people who actually attend church, the polarization softens. Because even if a church is 70% red and 30% blue or vice versa, because they are actually going to church and spending time focusing on something that they have in common, and then there will be religious talks or maybe or political talk, maybe it's a little avoided. Religious people who actually actively attend church regularly are less polarized than those who have given up church and are worshiping at the altar of sect.
Yeah, and to the atrophy point, I think that Elizabeth is talking about. John, I wonder, it just occurred to me as I'm listening to you all talk, we talk about the meaning crisis, but, and I'm not being cute, like you talk about awakening from the meaning crisis. And is there a corollary or flip side of sleeping through the meaning crisis?
Yeah, I don't think that's cute. I think that's good. So there's been a mistake, which I've repeatedly tried to correct and even did some videos, very poor sound quality with Chris to try and address misconception. People think that what the meaning crisis means is everybody's suffering from angst or nihilism or depression. Those factors are in existence, but you have to understand that a lot of the stuff we're talking about, it all keeps coming back to meaning. And the meaning crisis is that this is deeply in question for us. So you have to look at, there's not just reactive symptoms like suicide. The age of suicide is dropping, and there's suicide even where there's significant affluence and and things like that, or mental health issues are getting bad, or loneliness is increasing, or trust is declining massively. You also have to look at what a lot of people sort of hitting on it. People do a lot of avoidance strategies, right? And of course they do that like they do with everything else. Instead of facing, and so there's people that are suffering because they cannot help but face it. And then there's people who are trying to not face it, and so there's tremendous avoidance strategies. And those avoidance strategies usually mean trying to find some surrogacy, something that would act as a replacement for that sense of meaning. And so we've watched our culture go through, the MCU, the Marvel comic universe, and its rise and fall, and people were religiously invested in this. Like, if you want to find, people aren't very religious this day, go online and see what happens when somebody does a Star Wars movie that they don't like. They talk about how they're, like, the language they feel that a sacrilege, and I use that word deliberately, has been committed. And then talking about pseudo-religious ideologies, we've been trying since the 19th century to address the meaning crisis with totalitarian pseudo-religious ideologies. So we have a lot of avoidant and replacement and displacement. But the meaning crisis also means that people are doing things like the fact that there are more Stoics alive now than were ever alive in the Roman Empire. Right? So the pursuit of ancient philosophies, where philosophy was a way of life and not an academic enterprise, that's also a symptom of the meaning crisis. You have to look at a broad, like, there's people who are merely reacting, there's people who are avoidant, and there are people who are seeking to respond to the meaning. And the best way to explain all of them is because the issue of meaning is seriously in question for us. So
that's great. All right, well, I think we can go on to our next question then. All right, this is from Jacob Credo. And this is the question. How did Jordan Peterson almost single-handedly destroy New Atheism? Trademark. So you can question the question if you'd like, but so new atheism destroyed. How so? And what did Jordan have to do with it?
This has got to be equal.
Okay, so I know, but I have to say that when I heard Jordan Peterson the first time in 2015, I had exactly that intuition, which is that the way that Jordan was talking about religious ideas and the way that he was able to in my language, talk about symbolic structures, but was way better at connecting it to the world than I was at the time. I thought, I really did think that this would destroy New Atheism. Because I mean, obviously as a Christian who'd been thinking about these religious structures all my life, I always thought New Atheism was thin and stupid. And so it was just, but I just like, why are people falling for this? Like, I don't understand. And then I could kind of see that I was surrounded by Christians who were materialists. And so therefore these weird materialist arguments like about evolution and all this stuff, they were actually hitting them and they were deconstructing. I guess we didn't have the word back then. And so I think that Jordan had a massive, massive effect on the take. And when I met him at first, even I didn't understand because he always was like, I want to talk to Sam Harris. It was like the first people he wanted to talk to. It's like, I want to talk to Dan Dennett and I want to talk to Dawkins. I was like, why do you want to talk to those idiots? Like, that was my reaction. But he was absolutely right because he realized that they had a massive hold on it had come down into popular culture. And people who weren't that intelligent had taken those arguments and were like, like the old religious aunt that you had that never really thought about her religious ideas. She just kind of took it for granted. That was happening for atheism. So you had basically uneducated people that were atheists because, that dumb religion, it's so stupid. So anyways, so I think Jordan had a massive effect and was able to bridge the gap and was able to take a lot of ground away from these people. But at the same time, I think that you have to see it as something that, in some ways, Jordan was the head of something that was already happening. Because what happened is as soon as Jordan kind of appeared, then all of a sudden, all these other people started to pop up really fast. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, here. And then in some ways, it was like a wave that went through. And now, who cares about New Atheism anymore?
Well, one of the things, so there's some videos coming out with an economist named Dan Klein, Marcus Scherer, some of you know, he's in the corner. We've recorded them. Dan Klein has these ideas about mere beholderism, which in many ways is sort of parallel to, especially what Jordan Peterson was doing God in 2016 to 2018. I think, as John so nicely sort of, I think really tonight, or in his talk today, took apart this worldview that yielded New Atheism. And Dr. Jim, where's Dr. Jim? I just saw him out there. When I talked with Dr. Jim made a really important insight to me. He said, New Atheism in a lot of ways was a sign of a last gasp. Yeah. And because you see what Jordan had been doing, and I think what Jordan did so powerfully was nihilism had gotten to a point, and this sort of reductive materialism had gotten to a point that nihilism meant everything was arbitrary. What was so interesting, why I mentioned this Dan Klein conversation that's coming, is Marcus Scherer said, it's really interesting that you use that word arbitrary, because we all understand that word arbitrary means, it's just, there's no meaning to it. And Marcus Scherer says to me, the root word of that is arbiter. And, John had said something in our Friday estuary, pre-Midwestuary thing about sort of the implicit assumptions of atheism in these dichotomies. And what Jordan did was gave people a compelling image that, this is why it was so parallel to Jonathan, there's structure, there's patterns, that these patterns that we've seen throughout history that can be evident in religion and fairy tales and stories, these are built into the world, into creation, they're not arbitrary, or maybe they are because, Dan Klein and Jordan, especially in those early years, was like, even if ontologically you don't believe in whatever it is you think a God is, it's not, you'd say it again and again and again. It lays itself out. And I think very deeply, once that comes in, then suddenly on the Sam Harris front, it's certainly not determinism. On the Brett Weinstein front, you can't just undo your robot programming. On the woke front, these things, everything isn't just a social construct. There is structure. And Jordan, I think, displayed that so vividly in such a compelling way that light bulbs went on. And then once people began to see structure, they were like, tell me more. And
yeah, but what's weird is that the arguments were already there. It's not like David Bentley Hart wrote Beauty of the Infinite, 2002, 2003? He demolished New Atheism with one book. But it was so high that it didn't land. It couldn't land in the culture, and people couldn't assimilate it because it was very difficult. It was just very philosophical. Jordan had this way of talking to people, like straight to people.
So what you're saying, it was Pinocchio.
The Pinocchio story. Yeah.
The thing that puzzles me is that Jordan did this to New Atheism without becoming a believer himself. And I wonder, I don't know Jordan well at all, but I wonder why he hasn't been able to cross that barrier, even though he's not an atheist. But any thoughts, any ideas?
And Justin Brierley, my friend, the surprising,
Reverb.
People imagine, and these are Protestants, so I'll speak for Protestants here. Protestants imagine that if you can get someone to believe in God, then what? Because most of human history, people have had the gods or a god. If you read Plato in the Greek, you'll find God in the plural and God in the singular. That doesn't mean that suddenly if they believe in God, they're going to go forward at the Billy Graham crusade. It's not that simple. So, and I think Jordan, in many ways, in the Sam Harris, those of you who've watched my videos know this, I immediately saw in the Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson conversation. Jordan Peterson, when finally asked at the end of that first thing in Vancouver, said, well, what God do you believe in? And he opens his laptop, and he believes in a God of the structure of the universe, just like nearly everyone in the world has believed for as long as we have recorded history. Now, and then, well, why isn't he a Christian? Many people throughout history never been Christians, but they believe in all of these kinds of things. So that's why when people get so excited about God is coming back, I'm thinking, it's really kind of been a pause that really just a small segment of society hasn't believed. Almost everybody has believed, but it's still kind of a mess.
So, I've known John the longest, I suppose, of at least the people up here. And I knew him before he became a god. And I consider Jordan a friend. Jordan's a difficult friend. but I still consider him a friend. So Jordan's book is called Maps of Meaning. The reason why look, there's a movement on called liberal, it has nothing to do with political liberalism. Liberal naturalism. It's basically like we've got to give up, only the bottom level is real because we can't account for the four M's. Mind and morality and math and meaning. Right? And so Jordan talked about maps of meaning. He wasn't talking about theories of meaning. He had a theory about how can we reorient to meaning so that we can find our way. The new atheists had nothing to compete that. Couldn't compete with that at all. So he outflanked them completely. And then he exemplified it with tremendous personal courage. Right? I have a lot of criticisms of my friend Jordan, and I will make them to his face, and I have. And he's actually apologized to me for some things too. So, like, contrary to what some people think about him, he will listen. He will. He will. But that courage was also something that they weren't seeing in the new atheists. They were seeing smugness. And they were seeing a kind of hypocrisy, right? Because, Jordan talks about myth, and I want to get to Ron answering you too, Ron, because I think that's Ron, what you have to say is excellent. I think it's an important point, although I agree with what Paul said. But Richard Dawkins, a myth of religion, and then everybody claps, and then they line up to get him to sign his book, which is a religious act. Like, why do you want ink by this guy in your book? What does that mean? You want to somehow participate in him. And you're lining, like, it was, and Jordan just cut through all that. And he basically said, no, myths matter. And I'm going to try and get you to be as aware of them and true to them as possible. Now, Rod, I think, I agree with what you said, Paul. So this is not contrast, this is compliment. Jordan, my first allegiance, so this is partly how I would answer that question that was asked of me. The person that brought me out of the meaning crisis was Socrates. So I will have a profound, continual allegiance to Socrates. For Jordan, it was Jung. What you have to understand is Jung is anti-literalist, anti-fundamentalist. And I've traveled with Jordan, and Jordan hates fundamentalism a lot. Like, he'll talk about the religious types, and what he means is fundamentalists. And Jung's relationship to Christianity is deeply, deeply ambivalent. The people that want to assimilate Jung to Christianity haven't read enough Jung or gone through Jungian therapy. I've done both. Jung is ambivalent towards Christianity in a deep, deep way. Read John Durley's work, others people. So Jordan has an allegiance to Jung that makes him antithetical to what dominates a lot of popular Christianity in America, at least on the airwaves. I'm not saying it works theologically or anything like that. And he also has a deep loyalty to Jung, and he inherits from Jung an ambivalence towards Christianity. And so, like, I'm trying to get us all, myself included, to be more charitable. It looks like, piss or get off the pot, right? But that's not fair to him. Because I feel for Jordan, because I feel like he's in an impossible project. He wants a Christianity that he can reconcile with Jung, and I don't know if that's possible.
I'm sort of struck. Can I just say, I really value the merciful instinct in you, John. It's a beautiful thing. I really value the merciful pastoral instinct in you. It's a beautiful thing.
I will take that as a compliment.
Wonderful.
Why? Okay, so I've been trying to frame this question, and bear in mind that I actually don't know very much about Jordan Peterson. I have listened to very little, I have read very little, and I think probably that's just the default vibes that what passes on the internet makes me have a hunch that he might not like or respect me if he met me. And that's, all the stuff I was talking about earlier, right? That's homophily, that's, It's just, I'm not drawn. A lot of women feel this, not all women, but I'm not drawn, and that doesn't mean I hate him, it just means I haven't consumed a lot of stuff. So this is not a question in reaction to that about Jordan Peterson. What it is about the other highly educated intellectual men in my life, who I have many. I love them. I have very, very dear male friends, many of whom started New Atheist, then became Stoics, then did a bunch of psychedelics. So we're social creatures. And many of them who are now part of this uptick in interest in Christianity, right? And I'm the safe Christian that people can come talk to Jesus about, which I love. It's a ministry I enjoy very much. But I have watched many of those beautiful, thoughtful, highly educated men sit on the pot for 10 years. And when I really try and listen to what the problem is, that I can't remember which epistle it's in, but I will frustrate the intelligence of the intelligent. That sense in which, we're talking about the scripts about self, but if your self-identity is really about your intelligence, if your self-identity is that there is no problem or question in the universe that you cannot apply your intelligence to and unlock it, then getting on your knees and surrendering that part of yourself, saying, I don't understand and I never will. And I have to kneel, right? I have to surrender the desire for control and mastery and strength, all of which are in some ways really good and healthy and beautiful parts of the archetype of maleness in society, right? Those are things that men are taught to value, and that there are healthy and unhealthy versions of them. But I see in my dear, dear male friends, the surrender, particularly of the but if I could just figure it out, it feels like existential threat to them and stops them. And I pray hard for them. So I just wonder whether you see that dynamic in people around you or as part of what's going on. And the question about Jordan just made me think about that.
Just to clarify, I wasn't even asking why isn't Jordan Christian, but I meet so many people who say, I'm converted to Orthodox, or I'm a new Catholic, or whatever. Oh, how'd you get there? Jordan Peterson. And it's uncanny. We've all met these people. And it's just curious to me how he has led so many people to, quote unquote, the promised land. It wasn't, or so far hasn't been the crossover himself. And what you said, John, is really illuminating. I hadn't thought about that, about him. But he almost seems tormented by his inability to quite get somewhere on that other side, whatever the other side is going to be for him. And
which I think is
what's that?
Elizabeth. I think that's what Elizabeth is getting about the vulnerability required to sort of get on your knees and walk through the eye of the needle.
You're not going to think, you can't think yourself out of it. And that's, people who know me, read my thing, know my story is I lost my Catholic faith in large part because it was so intellectual. I thought as long as I had all the syllogisms and the doctrines clear in my head, my faith would be able to withstand anything. And it wasn't true. And that's when I became Orthodox. I had to set aside that intellectualism and triumphalism that had characterized my Catholicism. And that was on me. That wasn't on the Catholic Church. That was me. And get on my knees and come in that way and try to stay on my knees. Because what you say about I used to be the kind of guy who thought if I only find the right book and get the right arguments, that's going to solve that. And guess what? No, it's not true.
Well, for our next question, we tack to the future. So given everything that we've been talking about, G. Hamilton says this with a question. In the midst of the meta-crisis and decay of institutions, communities, and traditional modes of cultivating and transmitting wisdom and virtue, how best can young parents guide and educate their children to afford their flourishing into whole, true human beings? Great question. Borderline obsessed about it.
I spend a fair amount of time with elementary school teachers. We talk about a meaning crisis, and we're usually thinking about adults, but when we're talking about the ability to form friendships, so many of these basic skills start very young. And Rod talked about adults in Louisiana basically getting their community time cannibalized by the television set and the satellite disc. I think we're going to see in the next few years a realization that the same thing is happening with very small children with iPads and cell phones that busy, harried parents are putting in front of their children, and their children are losing a lot of, we look at children between, 0 and 5 and think, well, what do they do? I mean, talk to John Vervaeke, all the stuff he talks about, all those building blocks they're learning in that period. And so much of that time very early on is getting cannibalized by parents who are busy, harried, they're distracting themselves in their screens, they're throwing screens at their kids. And we're going to see really disturbing trends showing up in lower elementary where children don't have the basic capacity to function socially in these quasi-industrial schools that we have for them. And I think what we're going to see increasingly is an ongoing division in society between parents who are cognizant of this and are probably opting out of a lot of public school regimes, leaning towards homeschooling, other kinds of schools, much more restriction on screens, much more emphasis on engaging children right from the start socially, even though you can't take a test well, you probably could, but most people don't, between 0 and 5 about that basic capacity to interact with another human being. And I would expect we're going to see in the next 10 years crisis levels of this, but we're also going to see certain clusters of community where those kids are doing fine. And it's going to become increasingly obvious that that there are patterns developing that, it's a lot of these religious people and their communities where their children can they do go out and play, and they know how to play together. And I think this is going to become a very big deal in the next decade.
This is the Benedict option, what you're talking about. The book is not about withdrawing to the bunker. It's about finding ways to live in community, experimental ways. It's not going to be the same for everybody else, so that we can not only hold on to our faith in liquid modernity, but we can also function in the world that we live in ways that keep us sane and human. And it's so difficult. People say to me, why haven't you done it? I'm like, it's been really hard because we had our kids are all grown now, but we had our kids at a classical Christian school where parents would send them, and they weren't allowed to have screens there, but as soon as the kids walk out the door, they get their phones back, and they're right back in the world with everybody else. And it was so frustrating because I came to see that most of the parents who sent their kids to the school were not doing it because they had a vision of the good. They were doing it to escape liberalism. What they imagined was liberalism. But it's so difficult to find parents who see things the same way you do and are willing to make the sacrifice. The first sacrifice being willing to be thought of as weird, for the sake of a higher set of standards, for the sake of your children's moral and social and mental health. But there's what is the alternative? I was just down in Louisiana visiting cousins, and my cousins, my little cousin, 10, was showing me Skibbity toilets. How many people know Skibbity toilets? All right, I had no idea. I'm old. I live in Budapest. And they're like, it's brain rot. And that's what they actually call it, brain rot. And his mom was like, isn't that crazy? can you believe what these kids are doing? Like, but you give them the screen. But it's so hard to resist that, right? I mean, because I know we didn't have to deal with skibbity toilet when I was raising kids. But people thought, in my own family, thought that we were, my wife and I were so cruel to our kids because we wouldn't give them a smartphone or we wouldn't let them watch TV. And the first thing these people are going to have to do is be willing to be weird. But man, it would have been so much easier for my wife and me if we had had anybody else around us who agreed. And the churches, the ones I've been involved with, don't want to have anything to do with it. They want to keep religion as just talking about morality, personal morality, be kind, do this, do that. But this is real life. It's a form of spiritual and psychological hygiene to talk about the way technology interacts and deforms our capacity not only to be religiously faithful, but to be basically human. And the churches have got to get involved.
So it's a phrase we use a lot, like, because we do live in an intentional community, and it's another muscle we can build, the willingness to be seen as weird, and I find it really fun now. And I really like the reaction that people have, and you immediately get to depth, right? You immediately get to real conversations about real life. I've never had so many conversations about Jesus and the meaning of life and what is a human being since I moved into a commune, because it just cuts through all the, like, where you're going on holiday, and let's talk about house prices, and all of that is so boring anyway. But I think we moved into an intentional community, a really small one, that we're incredibly rigorous and hard-headed and non-rosy-tipped about it, with our children. Because we came to the conclusion that although that kind of living has risks for children, right? There are many, many stories of community living gone wrong. In some ways, it looks like a recipe for years of therapy, and it can be that the risks for them not living in more intentional ways with other adults, with rhythms of prayer and hospitality, with being encouraged to share their space, with a slightly different frame on what the good life was in the home was higher. So the risks of not doing it felt higher to us. I might be wrong. I hate saying stuff like this because in 20 years you're all going to be like, look at your kids. But it was exactly this sense that the tide is so strong. We have to find some bulwarks against it.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I like your image of the atrophied thing going to disuse. An additional concern I have, I teach high school students, but an additional concern I have is the unconscious ways in which sort of digital automation, both physically digital items, but just this ethos of the digital allows us to kind of sleepwalk through really difficult decisions that we have to make for our kids. And so there are all kind of creepy ways in which we can become numbed to the physical world. And what I was moved so much with John's talk earlier is just, they're inextricably connected. So that, so take this from a high school English teacher, one way in which you can be very countercultural and very weird, but afford depth and virtue in your children is to not hope your kids will read, but make them read. And it sounds pretty authoritarian the way that I phrase it that way. But I always bang on about other books. It's like kind of my shtick. But I really mean it. And sure, there are great books, and it's fun to read these kinds of books. But there is something physical about, and we all know this, because I assume there are a lot of readers in the room. There's something real about a physical book and a physical page and engaging in the imaginal, as you were talking earlier, John, that even just doing that will open up aspects of their future humanity that a lot of their peers will simply not have.
So I agree with all of this, but I'm going to say something
Like I've been warning about this for quite a while. I remember a long time when I was still doing, I was first online and I was doing the Q&As and Paul made a comment, and I'm still doing it for my office in U of T. And I said, AI is coming and it's going to make an impact on the meaning crisis and religion beyond anything you're imagining. And what are you going to do? And Paul wrote, he said, the whole room went silent. He said, the whole room went silent. Look, we have a culture that drives us to vacillate between boredom and burnout. And people feel trapped. And they have a double-bind relationship with technology. I work with a company that's trying to change this, which is they know they're losing themselves in their technology, but if they don't keep up with it, they're missing out. And they'll fall behind. This is what Rosa calls frenetic stability. We have to keep putting more and more effort in, not to get better, but just so we don't fall behind. And thank you for mentioning Rosa. Really, that was great. And so the thing that looks so wonderful is AGI. Because it looks like it's going to make everything easier for you. So we now have accumulating good evidence, not produced by AI, by the way, because AI slop is destroying science already. Like papers that are written by AI and submitted that have no experiment was actually carried out, nothing was actually done. It's already, there's a deluge. And of course, you know that every second video you're watching is liable to not be real on YouTube. You know that now, right? And you know that your belief that you can detect the AI is largely false. We know, good evidence, that the use of the LLMs reliably degrades critical thinking. We know that if you start to use LLMs to cheat here, it is massively predictive that you will start to cheat everywhere else in your life. We know that the LLMs tilt people towards psychosis. We know that the LLMs provoke people to a kind of really worrying religious ideology. I get emails every day from people saying their LLM has achieved sentience and enlightenment and has confirmed their particular view of God and metaphysics. And that I should follow their ChatGPT or Claude 4. By the way, I predicted that would happen, so I'm happy as a scientist and destroyed as a human being. So I study this stuff very, very deeply. And Elizabeth, when she said, I'm being weird, I refuse to use any LLMs. And I challenge you to consider doing that. But yeah, I know. And like, I probably understand better than most people in this room how they work, and I study them. But I won't use them. I won't use them. So one piece of very concrete advice backed by a lot of good evidence, because they're basically toxic for you, even though they seem to be so sycophantically helpful to you. If you're a parent, don't use LLMs. Don't model that to your kids. Don't use LLMs. And I know a lot of people, don't. Try it. You want something that's a challenge, because if you want real advice, it's going to be challenging. Don't do it. But I know. But remember, that's what they promised you about the internet and social media. And did it come true? No. Remember when we were told the internet would increase democracy? Remember when we were told that? Well, I'm old enough. Okay, when Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, so many people said to me, are you kidding? 50 hours of 1 hour lecture, nobody will watch it. I did Awakening from the Meaning Crisis as a revolutionary countercultural act to show that the medium that was dedicated to making people impulsive morons could be transformed into making them reflective philosophers. Now, if you're saying, do I think the LLMs can go that way? No, I don't. Because there's too much in the machinery of how they work that is parasitic on creating a parody of relevance realization without actually making it present in the device you're interacting with. And so people can massively project and bullshit on these things. And that's why it's so dangerous. That's why it's so dangerous. And I have friends that are like, no, you've got wise AI. I believe in wise AI. But I don't, by the way, the LLMs are not going to take us to AGI. So I do believe in wise AI. But I don't think that has anything to do with the fact that we're promoting in a massive way LLMs. And why are we doing it? Like, ask yourself, why are you doing it? Well, it's so much easier. That's how it begins. So I want to give, like, I'm not saying anything I don't do myself. I could do my research a lot faster if I use Claude 4 or ChatGPT, and I won't do it. Because you know what I want to do? I want to make sure that I spend the 19 hours reading the book. I want to spend all the time making mistakes. Because I've learned that, I know this sounds bad, most of my best learning has come from how massively I've made bad mistakes. So, try that.
What you're talking about brings to mind the totalitarianism that Aldous Huxley spoke of in Brave New World. It's a totalitarianism that, and if you remember Live Not My Lies, that is a totalitarianism that we're dealing with now. We all thought it was going to be Orwell in 1984. No, it's Huxley in Brave New World. And this came to me, it first came to me when I was in Budapest researching the book. My interpreter, when we were going between interviews, my Hungarian interpreter, a young Catholic woman, said that I can't even talk to my Catholic friends about the things I'm dealing with in my own life, in my marriage, or with our kid. Like, why not? She said, well, as soon as I tell them my husband and I have been arguing lately, or my little boy is keeping me up late at night, they cut me off and say, get a divorce, go back to work, put your kid in daycare. You've got to be happy. She said, I tell them, wait, I am happy. But a happy life is not a life without friction. I said, Anna, it sounds like you're fighting for your right to be unhappy. She said, that's it. Where'd that come from? Chapter 17, Brave New World. So I'm not going to go through the book, but if you remember the book, this is a world in which people have traded in their agency and everything that makes them human to avoid suffering. And by suffering, I mean not only material discomfort, but anxiety. And that's where we are today. Anna said that none of her friends, she was 35 then, she said, so many of my friends, they can't deal with the least little bit of anxiety. It derails them, it unhorses them. And I think this is quite common. You know, you see people having meltdowns. A friend of mine who was a high school teacher said that when she started her career, she might have to deal with 1 or 2 student meltdowns per semester. Now she said it's more than that per week.
Oh yeah, I can vouch for that, totally. Like when I started teaching at U of T in the before times, right? I get 1 student a year. I get multiple students a week. And it's not just that they're in distress. They are they're in psychological danger. And I'm not trained to deal with that. And yet we're expected to do. I totally agree. I totally agree.
Well, and the lesson in Brave New World is that to be human is to refuse comfort at all costs. You know, I should rephrase that. To be human is to be willing to suffer for something higher, to suffer for beauty, to suffer for God, and just to accept suffering as part of the human condition. And if you're willing to go to any lengths to make things easier, then you'll surrender your humanity to the LLMs eventually, because it makes life easier. And you'll be reduced to not being able to think or to handle any reality, which in a way, that might be what some people want from us, want to turn us into.
All right. If I could, we have one more question. Gotten a high sign from Mr. Sam here, but this one is submitted to us from Matthew P. This is it. What is the spirit we are participating in a fellowship around? What is the spirit we are participating in a fellowship around?
Around what spirit are we fellowshipping?
Yeah, around what spirit are we fellowshipping?
I don't know how to answer that.
I think they mean here in this conference. That's my assumption.
I believe so.
And I don't remember who was talking about it, but I think it was in John's talk. Can we put language? There are many different reasons why people came. We know that. So there's a purpose question. And I think I can make hours of video on this, and you will. There's a lot of different reasons people came here, but part of the reason. So I am in a estuary group, and as much as I can, I'm going to be there. And then I also ask what the other estuary groups are doing and talking about. And there are definitely patterns that are emerging. And again, Dan, Wagon Maker, who's part of putting this thing together, said, most of the people who have come here have had some deconstruction in their life, and they are reconstructing. And I think all of us on stage, including Kale, that's true of us. The meaning crisis has affected us at one level or another, and we are in some process of putting lives back together and communities back together. And so when I listen to most of you out here, you have sensed that in this project, there is a degree of promise, maybe for yourself, maybe for your family, maybe for your church, maybe for your neighborhood, that when I leave here, I will leave here with something. It'll be hard to articulate what, but it won't just be that I'm a Vervaeke fanboy, or I'm a Pageau fanboy, or boy, I got to see Rod Dreher and Elizabeth. I read all her stuff. It's not just that. I think people have a sense that whatever it is we are doing together is worthwhile and it's helping. Exactly how? Not sure. Can point to things, but to me, that's what I see. And if you can.
So, I mean, if you want to know what, let's say, type of spirit you're under, the first thing you do is you look at the name of the thing that you're participating in. So, 2 names. This little corner of the internet, and then second name, estuary. So, clearly, those two names are referring to the fact that this is not a central community. This is not a church. You don't form a complete body like a family or like a company or a team. You know, it is a marginal in-between place where, as Paul said, you're relearning the skills, reconnecting with people in order to go back to your actual real life communities and be able to participate in them more fully or more entrenched. And so I think that's the best way to understand what it is, because you wouldn't have names like that if it was more. And it's not, this is neither a criticism or a celebration. It's just you can recognize what something is. And in some ways it's great, because if it was more than that, maybe it'd be a cult, right? Right? Exactly. And if it was like less than that, then maybe it would just be kind of an information conference. And it's neither of those extremes. It's something in between. And so I think it's the best way to recognize the spirit you're under is to look at what's actually there. So.
I like to tell the story often of this woman. She's a real personal hero of mine, Kamila Bendova. She's quite old now. She was one of the leaders of the Czech resistance, the dissident movement against communism. Her husband went to prison for 4 years for it, but she was kind of the den mother. They met at the Benda family apartment. Václav Havel was there. All the top leaders were there. And I remember asking her when I interviewed her for Live Out My Lives, I said, you and your late husband were Catholics, but all of the people in the movement, in this fellowship of the ring that you had in your apartment, they were all atheists, hippies, none of them were Christians. I said, was that difficult for you and your husband? Because they were very conservative Catholics. She said, no, it wasn't at all, because we knew when we were standing up to communism, to totalitarianism, that the most important quality one needed was courage. She said, Rod, you mustn't think that our fellow Catholics had that courage. Almost all of them kept their heads down. They didn't want trouble. My husband and I felt as Christians and just as human beings, we couldn't do that. We had to stand up. And if we were going to stand up, we needed a community to stand with. And we found it in Havel and all these hippies and atheists. And she went on to explain that. And we knew that if we got taken to jail, they would look after our kids and would raise them to understand the world they were in. And they knew they could trust us too. And I found that really interesting. And I think I tell the story now because I think it might apply to what's going on here. This is my first time at any estuary event. And I've noticed that these rooms are full of people who don't all have the same religious faith or any religious faith at all, maybe not the same political convictions. But what seems to unite folks is asking the same kinds of questions. And you can look to somebody who may not share your faith or anything else, but you can say, you too, you've seen this too. And I'd much rather, a million times rather, have a serious conversation with a seeker who has noticed the same problem, is awake to the same problem, and is working on finding ways through these problems in this crisis than I would with someone at my church who ticks all the doctrinal boxes, but is oblivious and wishes to remain untroubled by the meaning crisis around them. And so that's the spirit I find here as a newbie, is a spirit of people who are awake. Dare I say it? Woke.
Steal back the word.
Or Vanderbilt.
That's probably an actual last name. I'm not done.
Yeah, oh, okay.
I mean, I'll jump for a second, why not? I think the spirit is fellowship. You can sort of read it either way. It's the fellowship that is galvanized or catalyzed by a spirit, but it's the spirit that is being catalyzed is friendship. And I'm not just trying to be cute about that, but I believe, Neil, I remember meeting you for the first time in southern Massachusetts with Paul in that estuary. And I remember you said, I reached out to Chad because I just kind of knew that Chad was supposed to be my friend. Like it was that. And it's sort of in its initial simplicity, and then of course all the complexity that follows from that. But it's friendship. It's, and John, you were speaking earlier about the struggles of your students and even your son, and the friendship is exactly what we're longing for. Friendship, relationship, these kinds of things. And for whatever reason, many of us feel sort of thrown who do we turn to? What do we turn to? Well, a friend is precisely the kind of thing that regrounds you. And when you were talking about, Elizabeth, that you're not even just you're only you because you have an other who can confirm you as a you. And so to me, the spirit is friendship, but fellowship is what we're after here.
I like all the answers, so I don't know if I have much to add. I talked about modernity separating intimacy from inquiry. You're putting them back together. That's what I see the spirit being here. Intimacy and inquiry back together. You're a counter-modernist movement. You're not postmodern, but you're counter-modernist because you're saying, no, we're going to put intimacy and inquiry back together and see where that takes us. It doesn't mean we're all going to agree, but we're going to keep intimacy and inquiry together. And that's very countercultural.
Just what he said.
Yeah. All right, well, I believe that brings us to a close, both for this session and I think for the evening. So why don't you give it up for our presenters. What a day.